All right.
We're live.
Okay, it looks like we have some our folks joining from the waiting room, and a few more are still shuffling in. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Taylor, Oakland City Council, and we are just now gathering. We're going to give maybe one more minute for folks to join from the waiting room. I know we've got folks following on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. Thanks for taking the time, and we will get started momentarily. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? As I said earlier, my name is Lauren Taylor. I am the District 6 City Council member representing East Oakland, one of two Deep East Oakland representatives. I'm fortunate to be joined by my colleague, Vice Mayor Larry Reed as well. And it is great to be able to have, I think we've got about 50 people so far on the Zoom, and I know that there are several others as well joining to come together to talk about how we move Oakland forward, specifically as it relates to homelessness and how we address this critical crisis, homelessness crisis, and support both our unhoused and our housed residents as we move forward. So clearly, homelessness is a critical issue that we are facing. It was the number one issue and for a long time before COVID, and we know that it will continue to be a major issue for us here in Oakland. It's important that we continue to move forward in addressing the critical crisis in really a compassionate way, because as you'll hear, a lot of the information, a lot of the statistics, a lot of the numbers and information that we know is that our homeless population is primarily those who have called Oakland home for a long period of time. It's primarily our Black and brown residents, and I'll emphasize our Black residents make up a significant portion of the homeless population. And we in Oakland espouse the values of really looking out for, caring for each other, social justice, social impact, and we have the opportunity to lead in a way that shows other cities, shows the rest of the Bay Area how we should be leading compassionately to help solve the crisis, support our residents. And that's what we're going to be here to talk about today. For a while, and I'm sure everyone who's on the call has personal experience, has very visceral reaction to having unhoused residents sleeping on the streets in Oakland. And that is something that we all share. But in order to solve it, we're going to have to come together. We're going to have to figure out how we, in a coordinated way, a very strategic and with a unified vision, move forward. And so because of that, I'm grateful to be able to host this forum that's going to lead to a discussion among council members on what our homeless encampment management policy and strategy is, what it should be, and how we move forward in a coordinated way. There's a lot of challenges to addressing these issues. We want to quickly highlight what homelessness is in Oakland, what it looks like, what the solutions are that we as a city are bringing to bear now, and that we're looking forward to complementing and adding to, and some of the challenges that we have faced in addressing homelessness as we go into the conversation of what more we should be doing from a policy standpoint. And this is one of several conversations we will be having. We will, obviously, there are so many different dimensions of homelessness, but we wanted to start here because of that pressing need and for leadership from the council. But in order to do that, we need to hear from you. So this evening is all about hearing from you, hearing your thoughts, your concerns, your perspectives as community, so that we can adequately represent those needs, those perspectives in City Hall. So with that, I would like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Vice Mayor Larry Reed, to provide some opening remarks, and then I will introduce our panelists who will give brief comments. And the majority of the time today, we will be spending in dialogue, hearing from you, Q&A or comments, whatever you would like to share, and we will have a way for facilitating that. If we can have the slides queued up, I think the first slide beyond the title slide, if we can have that presented, is going to be sharing information about thought exchange, one of the tools that we will be using to hear from everyone, hear your thoughts, your perspectives. It looks like that is hopefully coming up. I don't know, Abram, are you able to tee that up?
It says it's on my screen, but I guess it's not on yours, unfortunately.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not seeing that presented. So with that, there is we will have an opportunity for folks to provide comments in a number of different ways. Why don't we hear from Vice Mayor Larry Reed while we're trying to get those slides up, and then we will move forward to our panelists. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks all of the city staff that are part of this listening session. I just want to express my personal thanks to you for hosting this meeting regarding homeless encampment management policy this evening. So I will end there and be quiet and listen to those who have taken the time to join us this evening and to call in to give suggestions or to give criticism. So I just truly appreciate each and every one of you that helped put this together. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And it looks like, and is anyone else seeing the slides up? So I'm not seeing those yet.
Yes.
You are? Okay. Then that's something with my screen here. So why don't we go ahead and I believe then we should be showing the thought exchange slide. Thought exchange is one mechanism where you can provide your comments, your questions online. Through those comments and questions, you will then be able to weigh in and vote for which ones you agree with, so that those rise to the top of the list. And we will be taking those comments and questions in rank order. We will also have an opportunity after the first 20 minutes of the panelist presentations, we will have the opportunity to hear live questions as well. And so we'll give instructions on that when the time comes. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce our first panelist to provide an overview, Dario Dunston. He is the homeless administrator in the city administrator's office.
I am most concerned to hear about what the District 6 and District 7 constituents have to say about the city of Oakland's response to homelessness. I am here to listen just like you all. And so I will give some broad level overview of conditions on the ground right now, some of the things that we've implemented thus far. But again, I think what's most important is that we can engage in a dialogue around what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, and how we can design a path forward that works for our housed and our unhoused residents. So with that said, next slide, please. Good evening, everybody. I think it is almost evening now. My name is Dario Dunston. I am the homelessness administrator for the city of Oakland. I'm actually new to this role. This is a new role to the city. Prior to this, I oversaw our state grants in our Human Services Department. Many of you know that as the HEAP grant, or the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, and the programs that funded. And then prior to that, I was a policy analyst in the District 4 Council office. And prior to that, I was a firefighter, a medic, and an assistant fire marshal back east. And so I'm delighted to be over here on the West Coast. And where homelessness is a crisis that predates COVID, and one that we cannot lose sight of. And so next slide, please. every 2 years, there is what's called a point-in-time count and survey. And it happens usually the last week in January. It's one night. And the last count that was conducted, we learned that there are over 4,000 people experiencing homelessness in Oakland. And that's nearly 4 out of 5 of the people experiencing homelessness in Oakland are unsheltered, live outdoors, they live in tents, they live in vehicles, or in places just not meant for human habitation. And these numbers represent an unprecedented increase by 47% between 2017 and 2019. And that's on the heels of a 26% increase between 2015 and 2017. And so that lets us know right there that we indeed have a crisis on our hands, and one that that warrants a crisis response. I also want to highlight that approximately 70% of individuals experiencing homelessness in Oakland, they look like me. They're African American, and that's compared to only 24% of the general population in Oakland. And so, as I stated, we are indeed in the midst of a crisis. And then when you add COVID on top of that, it only exacerbates that crisis. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about what the point-in-time count is, but the point-in-time count, it takes place nationally. It is required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. But more importantly, that count informs local strategic planning, investments, capacity building, and advocacy campaigns to prevent homelessness. Now, as we move forward, I think it's important that we're all on the same page about what homelessness is. And so the point-in-time count uses HUD's definition of homelessness, which includes individuals and families. And specifically, those as people that are living in supervised publicly or privately operated shelters, designated to provide temporary living arrangements, or anyone that is staying at a primary nighttime residence, public or private, that's not meant or ordinarily used for sleeping accommodations for human beings. So this can include cars, it can include park benches, it can include the street, abandoned buildings, buses, trains, airports, campgrounds, you name it. A person that does not have a permanent shelter would be considered literally homeless. Next slide, please. Some key statistics. So in 2019, as I mentioned, our homelessness population increased by 47%. And so that increased from about 2,700 people to just over 4,000 people. So let's break down those numbers a little bit. So of those 4,000 plus individuals, over half, 54%, reported a duration of homelessness of 1 year or more. All right. 41% of those reported living in a tent. About 23% reported living in a vehicle. So that could be a car or a van. About 22% of those individuals reported living in an RV, and we've seen a proliferation of RVs coming to Oakland, and I'm sure we're going to get more into that as we talk about the services that we provide, as well as some policy recommendations we have with regard to RVs in residential neighborhoods. But I do think it's important to highlight that the number of people who are living in vehicles is increasing. Approximately 78% of the individuals that were counted and surveyed reported that Alameda County was their prior residence when they fell into homelessness, if you will. That's an important statistic because it debunks this myth that there are people that are being bused into Oakland. It debunks the idea that the majority of our unhoused population here in Oakland are not from Oakland. The data just simply doesn't bear that. The majority of the unhoused population in Oakland are from right here. It's also important that over half of our unsheltered population have lived in Alameda County for 10 years or more. So again, this idea that we have people that are coming to Oakland from other communities, the data just does not support that, not at least at the levels that we're hearing anecdotally. It's also important to mention that the largest age group amongst the unsheltered population is between the ages of 25 and 59, right? That's almost 3/4 of our unsheltered population are between the ages of 25 and 59. As I stated before, approximately 70% of our unsheltered population are African American, right? And we know African Americans only make up about 1/4 of Oakland's general population. And so we see right there that African Americans are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. As we see, over 50%, approximately 60% of the unsheltered population, they identify as male. All right, so that's telling us we have a lot of males, we have a lot of African Americans that are in need of housing. 36% of the homeless population are female, and approximately 38% have reported some type of at least one disabling condition. And so it is very true that we need to do a better job to provide not only mental health services, but healthcare services for many of our individuals who are sleeping out on the streets. Next slide, please. And so where are we seeing people in Oakland, right? As I reported, we're seeing them in tents and passenger vehicles and RVs. But I think it's important to highlight where are our largest encampments. And we're seeing our largest encampments in West Oakland and in the Flatlands, right? The East 12th Street corridor, all along the corridor, you can find a different population of unsheltered folks that are just in survival mode. And that starts at the lake and it goes all the way down to Deep East Oakland. The Wood Street corridor, we're seeing a large encampment over there as well. In addition to the MLK corridor. Those of you all who are familiar with the Santa Clara MacArthur Boulevard area, right under the 580 overpass, we've got a large growing encampment over there as well. And while we have taken actions in and around the lake that have proved successful in the past, we are seeing some growing encampments start to proliferate over in the lake area as well. And one that's not on this list, Kirkham, between 5th and 7th, also is in need of services. Next slide, please. So what are some of the root causes of homelessness? We've got to call it out for what it is. Systemic and structural racism is absolutely a root cause of homelessness. African Americans, people of color, have not been able to benefit from some of the same employment and housing opportunities that some other ethnicities have benefited from during this boom in the Bay Area. So we have to call that out for what it is, and we have to think strategically about how we address those root causes. But in addition to that, you're seeing skyrocketing housing costs. You're seeing a housing inventory that has little to no affordable or extremely low income housing. And also what has contributed to this homelessness crisis is a decrease in state funding, right? The state eliminated its redevelopment funding, which was the primary funding source cities used to build affordable housing. And that went away almost 9 years ago. And so, unless we address these systemic problems, we're only putting the Band-Aid on the issue. Next slide, please. So how are we doing compared to other jurisdictions? Well, here it looks like it's hard to see this slide, but what you can see in this slide is that over 50% of the unsheltered population in Alameda County are right here in Oakland. And so, we often get compared to San Francisco, but I think it's important to highlight per capita, Oakland's unsheltered population per capita is not only growing faster, but is larger than all of our neighbors. And so we need to figure out, one, how do we address the inflows into homelessness and the people that are exiting out of our system. We need to do a better job of making sure they can maintain housing and that they don't return back into homelessness. Next slide, please. So, we're going to get into a more substantive conversation around encampment management. But at a very high level, I think it's important, one, to acknowledge that there was a city council resolution passed in response to COVID that essentially requires the city to be able to offer individual housing units or alternative shelter for a person prior to closing an encampment. And if the city cannot provide those provisions, then the city cannot close an encampment. As many of you all know, we are pretty much maxed out in our emergency shelter system. So what that means is that essentially encampment closures have been suspended since the shelter-in-place orders became active, and will remain suspended until the shelter-in-place order is rescinded. And that is because we simply cannot obviously provide 4,000 units of housing for all of our folks that need it out on the streets. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to take any actions that may put anybody at an increased risk of contracting the virus or spreading the virus. And so we are encouraging folks who are living in encampments to do exactly that, which is shelter in place. And we opt to bring services to them rather than to be displacing them. I do want to say that while we have suspended closures and what used to be called the encampment management team, our former encampment management policy was suspended due to our COVID orders, we have established what we're calling Emergency Homelessness Task Force. And this task force has been established under our Emergency Operations Center, under the Operations section. And the Emergency Homelessness Task Force specifically is tasked with fielding encampment inquiries and complaints, assessing and tracking conditions at encampments, increasing outreach and waste collection services where appropriate, and really focusing its efforts on promoting harm reduction strategies, providing linkages to essential health and human services, and reducing encampment footprints where waste and debris are jeopardizing the public safety and health. Now, this task force was just recently established. I would say it hasn't even been quite a month yet. But if you would like to report conditions at an encampment, or if you simply have an inquiry about an encampment, I encourage you to send an email to homelessness@oaklandca.gov, and it's going to be on the next screen as well for you to see, so you don't have to frantically take the notes. But again, this task force is really to respond in a thoughtful, strategic way to some of the growing concerns that we are seeing at encampments in direct response to our shelter-in-place orders and to COVID. And then finally, we're going to get into a discussion around what are some of the challenges the city is facing when it comes to enforcement. And that can be enforcement of a closure zone. That could be enforcement of working with the community to make sure that their footprint isn't, the encampment footprint isn't impeding the public right of way or is not obstructing any of our major thoroughfares, our streets. It is to mitigate public health concerns when it comes to not just COVID, but other things that may arise in an encampment. And again, working compassionately with the folks at that encampment to make sure that they're living in a way that's not bringing harm to themselves or to others. Next slide, please. And so again, this town hall is really for us to listen to you all. And so here are some resources for you, but I am more excited about engaging in a dialogue with with each of you. As I stated, if you have questions specific to encampments, or if you want to report something specific to an encampment, I direct you to homelessness@oaklandca.gov. If you or someone you know are seeking housing or shelter, then we are encouraging you to call 211. Obviously, if there is an emergency, then you need to call 911. And if you want to report illegal dumping, we're still encouraging folks to contact 311. And that anyone that's wondering what the city has done, what we are doing in response to COVID-19 specifically, I encourage you to visit the city's website that's listed here to receive the most up-to-date information with regard to COVID. So with that said, again, I want to thank you, Councilmember Taylor and Vice Mayor Reed, for inviting me here to take part in this conversation. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Councilmember Taylor. And like I said, I'm eager to get to the Q&A.
Thank you, Dario. That was great background and overview. I think next we're going to hear from Lara Tannenbaum. She is the Community Housing Services Manager within the City of Oakland Human Services Department. She oversees a lot of the solutions that we're bringing, a lot of the partnerships that we're engaging in to support homelessness broadly, and also within that are encampments, those who are living in encampments. So with that, Lara, love to hear from you for the next 5 minutes or so to provide an overview.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you for having me. Can I have the next slide, please? So as the Councilmember said, my name is Lara Tannenbaum, and I am a manager in the city's Human Services Department, and my division oversees our homelessness funding. And I thought it was important to give a little bit of context to our conversation tonight about where our conversation about encampments fits in the city's larger strategy to address and end homelessness for its residents. In 2019, the city updated its 5-year strategy to end homelessness called our PATH strategy, or PATH framework. And these are the core components of that. And as you can see, it's a really broad strategy. It provides a framework for addressing homelessness across our full spectrum of services, all the way from preventing people from becoming homeless, addressing their homelessness, and then ending their homelessness with housing. The PATH framework really sought to look at who is homeless, what are the interventions that are needed to end their homelessness, how much does that cost, really what is the full scope of our investment that would be needed to really make a dent in this problem. There's specific strategies that are outlined, and you can see them here. So at the front end, we want to prevent people from becoming homeless. We want to maintain the number of emergency beds that we have and make those beds more effective. We want to move people through our system as quickly as possible to rehouse them. We want to make sure people stay housed once they get housed, that they're not returning to homelessness. And one way to do that is to help people increase their income through employment and other strategies. And then we want to make sure that we are keeping up with the need for building very, very deeply affordable housing. And you can see that encampment management, the strategy of addressing how people are living on the street, is just one component of a very broad response to homelessness. Next slide, please. I just want to talk a little bit about where our funding comes from and where it goes, and then I'll talk a little bit about the services specifically in encampments. So this is our current fiscal year that we're just wrapping up, and you can see we had about $34 million in funding. About a third of it was from the federal government, about a third from the state, and the remaining third was a combination of city, county, and private funding. We expect our total funding to address homelessness to go up pretty significantly in the next year due to both some city measures, Measure Q and Measure W, as well as to some one-time federal money to address COVID amongst homelessness. Next slide, please. This year, in fiscal year 1920, this is just showing where our funding went, and it's a little bit hard to read, but the column at the far left of your screen is our crisis response beds. You can see that we are spending the most money in that category by far. Crisis response beds could be shelters, could be transitional housing, could be our community cabins, could be safe parking. It's really anything at the very front end of our system that is helping to shelter people who are unsheltered. Some of the other big ticket items would be housing subsidies, so helping people move into their own apartment and supporting them with the rent for a period of time. And then you can see prevention, and health and hygiene are roughly the next things that we spend money on: prevention, preventing people from becoming homeless, and health and hygiene is really talking about the work that we do in encampments. Next slide, please. So let's talk for a minute about what we are currently providing to people who live in encampments. There's a number of services that we provide either as the city or in partnership with the county and other nonprofits. We are providing, and since 2017 have been providing, portable toilets, wash stations in encampments. We added in the last year or two mobile showers and laundry. So we're currently providing that at 40 encampments around the city. We have a street outreach team and street-based case managers who are working with unsheltered residents directly on the streets, getting them connected to homeless services, to mainstream services like GA or SSI or health insurance, helping people get their documents, ID, social security card, things that they're going to need if they're looking for housing. The county provides healthcare to people in encampments through healthcare for the homeless and their contracted street health teams. And then we also have mobile harm reduction services. Again, that's a county contract with a nonprofit to provide needle exchange, naloxone, referrals to treatment if that's what people are interested in. The idea is that there are a wide range of services that are available to people while they're on the street. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk for a minute about what we've been doing since the pandemic started, specifically related to people who are unsheltered. So in those several months, we've doubled our hygiene interventions. We were serving 20 sites around the city. We're now serving 40. Those sites are serviced 4 times a week, up from 3 times a week. We've added hand sanitizer to all of the units. So that was kind of our very first response to this pandemic. We've also worked very closely with the county to identify and move people who are especially vulnerable to COVID out of congregate shelters, out of crowded encampments, and into the hotel interventions and our home-based trailer intervention that I'll talk about in a moment. But really trying to get the people that are the most vulnerable into a safer place to be. The county has been providing COVID testing, mobile testing in encampments and in some of our sort of encampment-based interventions. The city is providing a lot of support to the county in those efforts and a lot of support whenever someone tests positive to really blanket that encampment with services. And Dario alluded to this in his presentation. We really want people to shelter in place the same way that housed residents are sheltering in place. So whatever we can do to help encampment residents not need to go too far to get their basic needs met, we're doing. So that includes hygiene interventions like toilets and hand washing. It includes food, it includes water. It includes bringing personal protective equipment to them so they don't have to go out looking for it. We really want to reduce the amount of flow between encampments and the need for people to move around the city. Our outreach team, since the very beginning of the epidemic, have been out in the streets giving people PPE, hand sanitizer, giving them information on how to stay safe, and kind of doing a general assessment of how people are doing. Is anyone exhibiting symptoms? Do we need to get anyone to be tested? Things like that. One of the most exciting things that's come out of our COVID response has been our ability to provide meals to people who are unsheltered and in our homeless services program. So I actually was told today that our number has grown. It's not 9,000 anymore. It's over 14,000 meals a week are being given to people who are homeless in Oakland right now, as in a partnership with World Central Kitchen. And that's really an amazing, it's an amazing thing to be able to offer to people, again, in this era of wanting people to stay put and not have to leave where they are. And then lastly, just about a month ago, we opened our home-based trailer site, which is using FEMA trailers that the state gave us. And again, it's targeting people specifically from East Oakland who are either 65 and older or who have underlying medical conditions that make them especially vulnerable to COVID. And that, again, is a health and safety intervention to get people kind of in an immediate safe place, and then we will work with them to get them more permanently housed. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to say the City of Oakland cannot do this work by ourselves. So in the same way that we need partnership with community members, we need partnership with our funders, and we also have a lot of partnership with the providers and with other organizations on the street. So this is just some of the organizations that partner with us, that partner with each other to really address Oakland's residents who are living unsheltered. And I will stop there and turn it back over to Councilmember Taylor. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lara. That's a lot of information. Clearly, there's a lot that is happening, albeit we all recognize that even all of the effort, the energy, the things that we're doing now, it's not enough given the size of the problem, the magnitude of the challenge that we face. And so it does sort of put us in a sort of the position of how do we sort of go beyond the resources we are able to bring. How do we do more, and how do we guide our residents through what is hopefully a temporary situation, what is expected to be temporary? We're not sort of doing this work with the expectation that the homeless population continues to grow and that those who are homeless stay there. But this effort is about moving them through out of homelessness into long-term sustained housing, and also the prevention side. But while we're sort of supporting those who are in the homelessness, it presents some challenges, some opportunities for how we move forward in being aligned. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Peter Radu. Peter is the policy director on homelessness for the mayor's office. So Peter, I'd love to have you provide some additional context framing of what it is that we are sort of working with and trying to grapple with. And then hopefully we'll quickly move to the interactive part of this this evening with those who are on the line. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Taylor, and thank you to the Vice Mayor as well, and to all of you for having me. My name is Peter Radu. I'm the Homeless Policy Director in the Mayor's office. And if I could have the next slide, please. So my colleagues, Dario and Lara, explained the current reality that we're facing in terms of homelessness in Oakland and the services that we're providing. What I'd like to do is walk you through the legal issues and some of the policy issues that we're facing as a city around homelessness, and what that means for what we might be able to do to address encampments differently moving forward. So our current reality is this. We have a current encampment policy. It was drafted by the city in 2017. Dario mentioned that policy is actually currently suspended, but the one that we have temporarily in place is very similar in structure. At the time that this policy was adopted, it was based on national best practices, which are still national best practices today, but really to look at encampments on a case-by-case basis and to prioritize them by considering their health, safety, and location impacts. Impacts both on the residents themselves, as well as on surrounding neighbors and businesses. And it's important to know we start with the premise that no one should ever have to live outside. It's inhumane, and we have to do better as a society. However, as you've clearly heard, we also realize that on any given night, we don't have enough shelter. We're about 1,500 shelter spaces short on any given night. And so we do not have the ability to bring everyone inside at once. And so what we need to do is prioritize encampments to ensure that our limited resources have the greatest impact and that they go to the greatest need. So two very important things, however, have transpired since that policy was first put into place in 2017. First, unsheltered homelessness has grown by 63% between 2017 and 2019. So when we prioritize encampments individually, that means that we end up creating a waiting list of encampments that we don't really have the resources to get to. And that quote unquote waiting list, if you will, has grown tremendously over the past 2 years, meaning that we have a backlog of encampments that we just aren't able to get to. The second thing, and this is really important, the Federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in late 2017 issued a ruling called Martin versus Boise. So in California, it is illegal under state law to lodge on public property. It's California Penal Code Section 647E. Feel free to look it up. But that means in Oakland that no encampment is technically ever allowed right now. However, in cities like Oakland, where there's literally never enough shelter on any given night for everyone, the Martin ruling found that our enforcing this state law would be a violation of the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And if you think about it, this makes common sense. How can somebody be penalized for needing to meet the basic need of sleep when they have nowhere else to do it except outside. The trade-off, of course, of this is that it also means that when small encampments pop up, our current policy prevents us from being able to do much about it. We don't have the shelter beds to offer people. We don't have other outdoor places where people can camp right now. And small encampments are most likely not going to rise to that level of priority relative to our very large and dangerous ones where we would prioritize them for intervention. So we cannot enforce this state law on a uniform basis. And this is why I would argue our current problem has outgrown our policy, and why we need a new policy that stops looking at encampments on an individual case-by-case basis and starts looking at this as a citywide problem. Can I have the next slide, please? What we need is a new encampment policy that would compromise and not criminalize on homelessness. Here's what we can do to address encampments and homelessness. In Oakland, we can, under the Martin versus Boise ruling, regulate locations that people are and are not allowed to camp. We can also set some basic standards for those encampments. In other words, we can regulate the types of structures, for example, we allow for safety reasons, things of that nature. Oakland has an opportunity here to create a new social contract between our unhoused residents and our housed residents. Our unhoused residents need a policy that affirms their constitutional and frankly their human rights to sleep and to exist when they have no other indoor options. And their neighbors need to recognize that this is the reality. However, our unhoused neighbors and our businesses, our housed neighbors and our businesses, which are really being negatively impacted by encampments that don't have many rules right now, sort of governing where they can and can't be and what they can and can't do, also need a policy that protects their rights to access, use, and enjoy their property, and protects their reasonable expectation to clean and accessible public space. The terms of this contract, and this is really important, need to be driven by the public. And that's why this needs to be a council decision that's made at the council level and not unilaterally by the mayor or by the city administrator. And here's the thing, when either side, housed and unhoused, fails to hold up their end of this contract, there needs to be consequences. And I'm not necessarily talking about law enforcement. Consequences can be progressive, and they can use carrots as well as sticks. But what we need to do is find the right balance between carrots and sticks, because neither is effective without the other. This is a new social contract. If we're willing to compromise and not criminalize on homelessness, there's no reason we can't solve this. Oakland can do this. There's no reason that we all can't be better neighbors to one another. And believe me, I aspire to an Oakland where one day we will no longer need a policy like this, where we will have enough shelter and affordable housing for everyone. But until that day comes, we do need a better way of managing our current crisis in a way that's more equitable for all of our residents. And this will be a very difficult problem to solve. I want to acknowledge that. But I believe that if any city can do it, it's Oakland. And so I just want to say thank you to Councilmember Taylor and to Vice Mayor Reed for their leadership in tackling this problem head on. And with that, I'm really excited to hear from you and what your ideas are, your concerns are, and your questions are for what this new policy might look like in Oakland. So thank you very much for having me. And I'll turn it back over to the council member.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter, Lara, and Arielle. Clearly, you guys have been rolling up sleeves, trying to help lead us forward, our city forward. And I'm grateful for you, the time that you're putting in, as well as your teams to help us get this right. Now is the time for us to have the dialogue, to hear from those on the line, those who are contributing online through Thought Exchange or through social media. At this point, I think maybe we can flash the Thought Exchange information up. If we can go back to one of the earlier slides that showed how people can log in and access Thought Exchange, I think that would be helpful so we can get some additional participation relative to questions. And while that is happening, we're going to put that slide up so folks can see how they can contribute their comments through Thought Exchange. Why don't we hear from one of the speakers who have raised their hand in Zoom, and I invite others who are listening in Zoom, if you have comments or questions to ask, go ahead and raise your hand now. We will establish a queue through Zoom. We will take questions submitted through Thought Exchange as well, and also monitor the social media sites. So I guess for whoever's monitoring our Zoom, maybe you can call the first name.
Vera Clanton. Everyone has 2 minutes. Vera Clanton, I'm going with you first.
Great. And you don't have to, but if you'd like to acknowledge where you are calling from, sort of your neighborhood, that might give the rest of those listening, participating, some context as to where you're coming from.
Sure. Hi. Yeah, I am a East Oakland mom and also an OUSD parent. I also work as a volunteer, partnering with the city and the county, doing some of those tasks that were described in the slides. I deliver meals, I deliver PPE, I do COVID screening. I've had multiple encampments with positive cases that I serve. This is not what I plan to talk about, but I do feel like I need to mention, from being on the ground in encampments, much of the information on those slides I know to just be factually untrue of the experiences and the situations in my encampments that I serve, and of the people, other people doing that work that the city is claiming to partner with. So I am concerned about misinformation being shared about what services are being offered. I do also want to point out, as an OUSD parent, I know that we're really struggling now, especially with East Side schools, with a lot of families in Oakland that don't have access to Wi-Fi and who cannot access spaces like this space in order to make themselves heard. So my first sort of question would be, what is being done to help housed Oaklanders who don't have Wi-Fi to participate? I've been told by multiple people at the city, including some people on this call, that they know that homelessness is going to increase very soon as a result of unemployment with our lower income residents. I think they need to have a voice in this, but also I am concerned by how much input is not being received from actual unhoused people who are living in these situations. The survey that went out seems to sort of frame them as a danger, or frame them as sort of pieces of furniture that can be moved. I'm upset to hear talk of using sticks, metaphorically even, on homeless people. That's not what they need. If we're concerned about their encampments not being clean, then we need to clean them. If we are concerned about people who have to perform bodily functions fouling our waterways, then we must provide them with sanitation. And seeing on that services graph, that's not where this money is going. And that is absolutely reflected in what I see in our camps. Is hard for me. You know, I'm a parent. My kids are not harmed by homeless people, but I do think they're harmed by seeing how much we do not care for people who are going through a difficult time. At our school, there are parents and families unhoused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Why don't we capture those thoughts, respond to that? Dario, would you like to respond quickly?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank Sarah for her comments. And I think that they are important ones. And the reason why we're here is to engage in this honest, candid dialogue. And so, Sarah, thank you for bringing to our attention that we could be doing a better job. And if you could help me, right, because I absolutely intend to follow up on some of these things. What are some services that you're seeing that are not being provided? What are some of the service gaps that you're noticing when you're out there doing your work? And from the slides that you observed, what are some inconsistencies? Because if we're not honest about those, then we can't address it. So any information that you can provide will be extremely helpful. And again, thank you for your comments.
And Daria, I think it was Vera, how would Vera reach out to connect and provide that information and engage?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
She can reach out to me directly, but I was hoping, so this isn't going to be a conversation?
If Vera, I think we might have had a little bit of time left. I don't know if Vera is still there.
I am.
Provide.
And I will work to keep it brief. Arielle, thank you so much for wanting to make it a dialogue, but I will try to be conscious of how much time I'm taking up.
Yeah.
I would say that I'm serving over 100 unhoused individuals in various encampments. I do want to say it's made a huge difference to have the sweeps stop. Sweeps are not effective. They use a lot of money. So that's been a huge improvement. And I've been able to see more of the same people from time to time and hear about their experiences. I don't know anybody who has been offered showers or laundry service. Some of them know of places where they can go and access that if they're mobile, but that's not happening. I've photographically documented cases where sinks and toilets are not being serviced, or there are massively insufficient facilities to the numbers of people who are living in an encampment. There are often a lot of excuses for why that servicing isn't happening, but what that means is it just becomes a greater public health crisis in those spaces. I have had many vulnerable people who are in high risk groups for COVID who have absolutely, or with known exposure, who have not been moved into hotel spaces. And I know of people who've had positive tests who have not been moved. I don't want to disrespect the work that anybody is doing or the fact that this is a huge task, but I think that sometimes the city is not honest with the public or with the press about what's really happening. There is a statement that these pieces of plastic have been delivered, but my folks at my camps are not asked where they would work best. They are not asked what they need. They are not treated as though they might have input to offer about what would work for them. And then I know these things are not being serviced 4 times a week or anything like that. That's just not happening. I don't want to speak for any of the organizations that are being listed that I actually know do not have positive or supportive relationships with the city, because I think that that's their space to speak to that. But that's sort of the extent of it. And I would just love for my folks out at the camps to be asked more of these questions about what they need, about what they think about what should happen in encampments.
Thank you for that, Vera. If we can, I know, Peter, you're on the line here. Maybe you can speak to the engagement that we have been having with respect to hearing, listening. I think not just the survey that went out recently and how we sort of sought to make sure we were hearing collective voices, but then also I know that there are efforts relative to pulling together our housed and our unhoused residents to hear from them in a more intentional way.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. And Vera, thanks for your comments. It's good to hear from you. I know that you're absolutely right when you say that we need to proactively plan with and not for people who are living in encampments. And so it's important that when we think about what these terms of a new social contract or a new policy might look like, that's done in partnership with people who are experiencing homelessness and people who are living that. And so that survey we passed out was informed. There was input that was provided by homeless providers and some of the residents at our cabins programs and our safe RV programs. And obviously the meeting that I had with the HOG back in February to hear your framing concerns. And we had over 800 responses that came in. About 14% of those were from people who are currently or formerly unhoused. So I think that's very important. And what we saw is that actually when you talk about setting rules and standards and locations, when you disaggregate those data by housing status, we're actually finding that people who reported currently being unhoused are in favor of having those standards, sometimes by higher than the average. So for example, allowing the fire marshal to inspect sheltering structures for minimum life safety, right? We found that people who are unhoused or had formerly been unhoused, 88% of them were in favor of that compared to the overall population of 85%. So that's just an example that we did really do our best to include those voices. 1% of our general population is roughly is homeless, and 14% of survey respondents were homeless. And so I think that's not the type of representation that we would love, but it's but it's I think indicative of the efforts that I know that our homeless outreach team and that our staff made to honestly try to get this out there. But to your point, it's incumbent upon us that whatever we do moving forward, it include the voices of people experiencing homelessness, and that we work to plan out how this might be operationalized with folks and not just for folks. So your point is very well taken, and we will keep that in mind as we move forward.
Thank you. And obviously I'm not doing that great of a job facilitating because we've only gotten to one question so far. So maybe we'll do better with the next one. So I think we let's go with one more person who has raised their hand, and then we'll go to the thought exchange.
We have James Van, who's our second person who raised their hand earlier. Going with James Van now.
Okay, James, we're going to give you 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I respect all the people in the city who work on these problems. They're all well-meaning. They're good people. Our policies are wrong. We are never going to catch up with the problem. Peter is right. The problem has certainly outrun the policy, and it's going to just get worse and worse. Somebody said that as a result of this COVID-19, the homeless is really going to jump again. And even those figures from the point in time count are nowhere near accurate. Even people at Everyone Home admit that it's an undercount. All counts that we probably have around 9,000 to 10,000 people who are homeless. What is wrong with the city's policy and its programs right now is it's approached from a sort of bureaucratic angle. Look at I think we've got to refocus and discover, come to a decision that we need to refocus on housing people, not housing people, but giving people shelter. We should do that by a number of ways. One, we should buy old buildings, abandoned buildings, vacant buildings. We should buy up lots. We've got to get more places that we can put people. Once we have places to put people, then we can look at ways of administering, self-administering. We can't continue with tough shed villages that cost $1.5 million a year to operate. We've got more toward a self-administration model and provide the basic sanitation and health care that needs to be given to the people in the streets. We got to move this to change the policy.
Time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you for that. Maybe Lara, you can speak to some of the suggestions that James has thrown out relative to different investment purchases to really get folks housed and shelter in the near-term time frame. I know that there are a few things that we're doing, albeit it can certainly be more.
Yes, it can always be more. And I think what's hard about the work that we all do in this area is that it never feels like enough, and it often doesn't look like enough because we see so many people who are still unsheltered. And yet we know that between 2017 and 2019, for example, we doubled the number of crisis response beds or spaces that we have in Oakland. So that was a huge increase and still just a drop in the bucket to what we need. I do think it's important to think about, the range of interventions that we need to address homelessness. And if we put all of our eggs in one basket, if you will, if we put all of our efforts towards just creating emergency response beds, then we will just fill those beds up and we will make new beds and we will fill those beds up and we will make new beds and we will fill those beds up. We have to put our efforts also to preventing people from becoming homeless, and we have to put our efforts into housing people. And it's a balance, right? It's a balance that we all have to make as a city and as citizens when we see so much suffering on the street. And how do we not just address what's right in front of us in the moment? But if we have to take a bigger view and we have to focus on housing as the solution to homelessness, and a shelter bed for everybody is not necessarily the suggestion if those folks are not moving on to housing. So I appreciate the need for more shelter and to be creative in how we rapidly create that, but we also have to really think about what comes after that.
Great, thank you, Lara. So next we're going to switch to the thought exchange, and so if that can be brought up and shared. But while we switch to that, I did want to just acknowledge, as the chair for the council's Life Enrichment Committee, this is clearly, it sort of falls underneath our scope. And so myself, the other 3 council members, we will be really processing all of the information that's coming out, the survey responses that Peter was alluding to, the recommendations from staff, the information that we're gathering from this forum. There have been other town halls, community meetings as well. And then that's not even to mention all of the phone calls and emails that we as council members are receiving from you residents of Oakland and advocates and business owners and others. And so we will be gathering all that information, and on July 6th, we will have our first committee meeting that really digs into that information, where we start to flesh out how we move forward, take that information into something that folks can rely on, can anchor to in terms of how we're moving forward, living up to our values. With that, it looks like we have the thought exchange up now, and we've got the higher ranked and more popular questions towards the top. The first one, I'm reading: the camp near Home Depot Fruitvale was going to be cleared. How did that go? Where were the people told to go? Maybe, is that Arielle? Is that something you can respond to?
Yes. I believe that this question is referring to the encampment that was directly in front of the Home Depot on Alameda. And so there was an operation in February of this year. Our Human Services Department did conduct a site profile there. Our outreach team went out and identified that the majority of that encampment were vehicle dwellers. There were people that were living in tents as well there, but the majority were in some type of vehicle, many of them in recreational vehicles, RVs. And so the city did open a RV safe parking program on the corner of High Street, right as soon as you get off of 580. And so many of those folks that were at that encampment, not all, but many of them did enroll in the RV safe parking program. Lara will be able to give the specific capacity, but last time I checked, they were at capacity. And there were a few people that ended up moving into our community cabins programs as well. But like I said, that encampment, that operation took place in February this year, and the majority of the folks that were staying there are now residents at the RV safe parking program on High Street. Lara, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that response. Another question: what is being done to end drug dealing openly all day and night in encampments and parks? Drug dealing brings crime and violence to the encampment at Fitzgerald Park. I'm not sure who's able to speak. Maybe if not specifically with Fitzgerald Park, the aspect of drugs, crime. I know that safety, public safety within encampments is an issue at times as well. Dario?
Yes. Again, we're here so we can have a candid discussion. And if we're going to be candid, there are some narcotics trafficking and even human trafficking that is taking place in some of our encampments. Not all of them, and not everybody at an encampment is a bad actor by any stretch of the imagination. But the reality is there is some narcotics trafficking and human trafficking going on in encampments. And this is an ongoing conversation with OPD. On the heels of our George Floyd demonstrations, which I support wholeheartedly, unequivocally. We are engaging in a discussion about what does law enforcement in engaging our community look like, and how do we do it in a way where our Black and Brown residents are not disproportionately impacted by that. That plays into this very question, and so I don't have a good answer, because right now what we do is we'll refer the complaint to our narcotics unit with OPD, and they will investigate. But clearly, we need to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it, because at some of these encampments we are seeing some narcotics trafficking increase. And so the short answer is we need to do a better job. And I hope that we engage in that conversation more robustly during the July 6th LEC meeting. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Peter, for his comments on this one, as well as Lara, because we all have our opinions when it comes to law enforcement at the intersection of homeless encampments.
Yeah, thank you, Dario. Just two brief things that I would mention. One, I think it is important that our policies separate homelessness from the behaviors that happen in and around homeless encampments. And so it is providing some sort of mechanism for dealing with crime within encampments is different from criminalizing homelessness. And I think the encampment management team, now the Emergency Homeless Task Force, really does try to look at each encampment on a case-by-case basis, and that nuance won't be lost under a new policy.
I think we lost. Peter, you still there?
Separating out the homeless encampment from the criminal aspect there is very important. The other thing too that I would say is that I think Vera was mentioning sort of the issue about sticks as well as carrots. I started my career working as a case manager in a homeless shelter down in San Jose. I was working with people who were dually diagnosed with substance abuse problems as well as mental health problems. I did street outreach, and so I kind of learned working with folks what does and doesn't work systematically and for people. And one of the things that's really important to think about is this concept of stages of change. And this has been backed up by many years of research in the clinical psychology kind of world and practice. If somebody is ready to engage, we need to do our best as a city to provide incentives and not enforcement to help them, right? To offer outreach, to offer shelter. If they're not in a place to do that and they're engaging in behaviors that are causing a negative impact on the rest of the community, then I think it's also incumbent on us as a society to have a conversation about what do we do about that if incentives and pro-social kind of alternatives aren't effective, because it's not equitable to allow that to go on and to continue to have disproportionate negative impacts on the neighbors. So I think I would just kind of keep that bird's eye view in mind around what this policy tries to achieve. Lara, did you have any other thoughts?
No, thank you.
Thanks for that, Peter. I think that's helpful in terms of the framing. I'd like to go a little bit further relative to mental health and some of the challenges with best serving those who need mental health support. One of the things that we've been talking about on the council, to Arielle's point, is providing an alternative community response to police. It's referred to as the macro program, and being able to set up an alternate response network that our 911 dispatchers would be able to go to, and for those cases where police response is too much, not right, not the best fit, and a lot of those mental health cases. And the conversation has been that some of the homeless encampment response would also be covered in there. So I wanted to acknowledge that as one solution that's we are looking to launch within the city, and at a minimum a pilot view, if not bigger, in October, I think is the target. But when we talk about mental health needs, mental health support, it begs the question of how are we partnering with the county, who is the primary source for supporting that. I don't know, Lara, if you do have any perspectives on the partnership with the county and their scope there, since that's, you know, their core is health and mental health, behavioral health, physical health, and what might also be needed relative to that support.
Sure. So mental health care, healthcare is the jurisdiction of the county. And just in the last year, the county has really expanded their street medicine capacity, and that's both physical health and mental health. So they have a number of health teams that they've contracted with that are working in different areas of the city. And they work very closely with the general street outreach teams that the city contracts with. So I think that has helped quite a bit. But in general, I would say in terms of our connection, our street outreach teams are able to assess people. They're able to make referrals to county mental health care when that's needed. We all know that those resources are insufficient. They're insufficient for people who are homeless. They're insufficient for people who are housed. I think that this macro pilot that's being discussed is fabulous. I think it's going to make a huge difference in having a real expanded mental health response on the street in a way that we don't have now. So I think that's going to, I'm optimistic that that's actually we're going to see really good results from that.
Great. Thank you for that. I know that there are other hands in the queue on Zoom, and so maybe we can call out the next couple who want to speak.
All right, we have Naomi Schiff. Naomi, you have 2 minutes once the timer goes up.
Is Naomi there? Maybe unmute.
There we go. It wasn't letting me. Hello, thank you for having this meeting. My first question was about the relationship with the county. I have the uneasy feeling that it hasn't been as smooth as it should be, and I really hope that the city council will extend themselves, or the Life Enrichment Committee, to the county, because I'm not convinced that all is well in the relationship between the county and the mayor's office. And I think the competition for funds and some of these political matters have really been an obstacle, and it's time to get over that. Secondly, I would like to say that there are opportunities for some buildings that we ought to acquire right now while we have the COVID money and state funds. I hope somebody's looking into the dorm on Clifton that CCA has emptied out, and which they're going to sell separately from the rest of their campus. This is an opportunity. It now, I think, can house 72 people. It's not a lot, but you know, a whole bunch of smaller sites may be more feasible than trying to do gigantic projects. And there are some others. So I really was pleased that the county went ahead with the Lake Merritt Lodge project, and I think the city and county need to really be looking at our inventory of underutilized sites and grab some of them quick while the prices are lower, not higher, preferably. I did want to say another thing that I find really troubling, which is I've been hearing about these 40 sites that have been served with porta potties and washing stations, but it's been the same number for more than 2 months now. And at every meeting, your hardworking staff tells us about those 40 sites. We need 80 of those, not 40. So I would like to ask, when is that number going to change? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think two key things I heard. One is about acquiring buildings and additional space, and then the other is related to what does it take to expand our capacity for providing the sanitation at multiple sites.
And Mr. Chair, can I just ask one question? And so no one has really defined the role of the county in this whole issue, since they get the bulk of the money that comes in for mental health, they get the bulk of the money for homelessness and for social service. My understanding is they're going to get about $290 million of that care money. I don't know if anybody asked the question, how are they going to spend that $290 million to address the largest city in Alameda County that has the greatest need for the use of a lot of that money to help us address the issue around homelessness. And I don't know if Lara, you guys have had any conversations with the county about how they intend on spending that $290 million of care money. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that in. So we'll add that on to the other two questions that we heard from Naomi. Who wants to jump in, try and address those, either the county, the building acquisition, or the sanitation and what it takes to increase sanitation solutions?
I can. Oh.
All right, go ahead, Lara.
All right, we'll go Lara and then Peter. How's it?
Okay.
Sounds good.
I can address some of that. We are actually actively looking for buildings. I think we have money through COVID to purchase buildings. There's more money that we can apply for or draw down to purchase buildings. I appreciate you bringing up the dorm at CCAC. I looked at that last week. It's beautiful, and really excited about that building. Would love it if we could purchase that. I think right now, and Peter can talk more about this, but the issue is not as much about purchasing buildings. Believe it or not, there is capital money available for purchasing buildings. The issue is what happens afterwards, and what does it take to actually run a building to turn it into permanent housing and support it for very low income people over time. So I think finding those ongoing funding sources that's the rub that we're all struggling with. And Peter may have more to add about that. I can pause. And Peter, do you want to speak to that?
No, you're absolutely right, Lara. And I think one thing too that's exciting, or that I'm excited about, is that the budget proposal that's coming before the council would use some of our federal COVID dollars to kind of continue some of our crisis response programs, and it would free up some of our state money to create a pool to start to that we could draw upon to actually subsidize units over the long run. So obviously council has the final decision on the budget, but that proposal would really prioritize some of our homeless money, to Naomi's point and to James Van's point as well, for responding to the permanent solutions here. And so I just wanted to emphasize that. There's a lot of state money coming from the budget, the state budget, which is imminently going to be passed here any day. I hear there's $550 million in federal CARES Act money that the city of Oakland could access to purchase those. And so I'm excited about this budget proposal that would actually free up some money that we might be able to draw upon to operationalize those, because it's not just about the building, it's about the services and keeping the lights on in the building. And then with respect to the county partnership too, that's a great point, Mr. Vice Mayor. And the mayor's office has been working closely with Supervisors Chan and Carson and other Alameda County mayors to start to explicitly define what are the roles of jurisdictions in Alameda County and what is the role of Alameda County itself and the departments in Alameda County to address homelessness, because we each do separate things and we do some things well. Some things are within our purview and others are not. And so how do we synchronize our efforts rather than working in parallel and kind of alongside one another? And there's also a bill at the state level, AB 3269, that the mayor's office really supports, that would require a greater role for the state and the county in addressing this crisis. And so to your point, Mr. Vice Mayor, and Naomi as well, that's definitely something that's on the mayor's office radar, and we're working to explicitly define what the county's role is to meet us in the middle.
Hey, can I jump in, Councilmember?
Please go ahead, Dario.
Yeah, so the first thing is, for clarification, I want everybody listening, when Peter was citing the $550 million, that we would be potentially get a portion of that, not the whole $550 million. So that's the first point of clarification. And then the next piece is, to Vice Mayor Reed's point, Yes, we are having those conversations with the county, but I think Vice Mayor Reed is highlighting that traditionally, historically, the county has been the agency, the lead agency in responding to homelessness. And I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, the city has really taken the lead in that effort. But he is right. Historically, that has lived, homelessness services in response has lived with the county. And so as Peter and Lara both stated, we are trying to figure out what does this new normal look like. Obviously, the exponential rise in homelessness in Oakland has put some strain on the county. But we do need to figure out how do we move forward in a way that is responding to the needs of our unsheltered population.
Great. Thanks, Arielle. And one thing that I'll also throw out in terms of real-time responsiveness to the question about the county, for anybody who's interested in weighing in, the Board of Supervisors are having a meeting tomorrow at 9:30, the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, and there is an opportunity to help them appreciate the need and the desire to make sure that there are sufficient funds for the things that we're talking about directed towards Oakland as well. With that, I think we might have a couple more in the queue. Maybe we can call them out.
So we have Desiree Turner, and then I'll follow by Tom Baker. Let's go ahead and start the timer for Desiree.
Hi, I'm Desiree Turner, resident of Arroyo Viejo. I just had a question. Earlier, I heard that the focus is on the bigger encampments instead of the smaller encampments, and I'm not understanding why. It seems like to me that that's backwards. It seems like the focus should be on the smaller encampments so that way it can prevent them from getting bigger. And plus, the smaller encampments tend to be in residential areas. So I don't know. It just seems to me, house the smaller encampments first to prevent them from becoming bigger. And I think I'm done.
All right. Thanks, Desiree. So I would like Dario and Peter to respond to that. I think Dario, from the standpoint of how encampments are prioritized to provide resources to support and even help those who are living in those encampments get the transition into longer term housing. And then Peter, if you could follow up with the aspects around the encampment management policy and what that might mean for how we, relative to encampment size, and how we may end up supporting folks in different sort of environments or situations. So Dario, maybe you could start.
I'll start. So the first thing I want to do is just really raise up Desiree's genius, because when you put it that plainly, Desiree, it makes all the sense in the world. And I think sometimes you just need to step back from something to get some clarity. I can give you the explanation of why the bigger encampments have been prioritized. Is, to borrow a medical term, you're triaging your most acute or your most egregious public safety or public health risk, right? And from a government standpoint, you want to try to mitigate or lower or reduce, public safety and public health concerns. That is why typically those larger encampments rise to the top, because the public safety and public health concerns at larger encampments, you can ignore, because, and not saying that you should be ignoring the public safety or public health concerns at smaller encampments, but if you have an encampment with over 50 people and there are significant fire hazards, you can't justify not addressing that. So with that said, though, I do think that there is some value in looking at some of the smaller encampments to see, are we able to address, are we able to mitigate, house people in some of the smaller encampments, while we're not losing sight of those larger encampments that may be posing significant public safety or public health risk. So Peter, I'm sure you can help me out.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, it's a really great point you make, Desiree, and I think that one thing that the council will be considering on July 6th are some policy changes that would allow us to act, I think, more comprehensively in providing alternatives for some of those smaller encampments. Because right now, what we are sort of bound by is the resources that we do have, which are really only indoor options for people. We've got shelter beds and transitional housing beds. But if we had we have other places in the city where people are allowed to camp, and if we are able to offer that in addition to shelter, that would allow us to, help get to some of those smaller encampments, allow them to have a place to be outside while we work with them over time through outreach to try to identify other alternatives. That's something that we lack right now. And so that's kind of the spirit behind this new policy is we have a lot of places where people can't be, but if we have some affirmative places where people can be, then hopefully that will give people alternatives, and it will reduce the impacts on you and your neighbors that are very real and need to be lifted up. So I appreciate that, and I hope that on July 6th you consider participating and offering that perspective, because I think that's exactly what we're trying to talk about here with this new encampment management policy proposal.
Great, thanks, Peter. And as a reminder for everybody, July 6th, the Life Enrichment Committee meeting will be happening. That's at 1:30 p.m. And there will be information on the city's website on how to participate in that. Also, if you have comments that you want to share and provide to the entire city council, you can email them at council, spelled COUNCIL, at oaklandca.gov. And that way you can let everyone know on the council what your thoughts, comments, concerns, etc. are. With that, I do want to acknowledge that at 7:34, we had this scheduled to 7:30. I am available to extend a little bit longer. I'm not quite sure about our panelists, but I know that there are a few more questions to answer and want to give folks and also comments to be made. So I think we had Tom Baker, who was next in the queue. And if anyone needs to drop, feel free. I think maybe we'll go for another 15 minutes, if that's okay. All right, great. Tom.
Okay, hello. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. My name is Tom Baker. I live in District 6, next to Royal Viejo Park. To kind of piggyback on some of the things that Peter just mentioned, as well as Desiree, there are a lot of places that people can't be. There are a few places where people can be. I have a lot of faith that there will be new places or existing places that will be allocated to unhoused residents at a point. That some creative solutions will be found, that the systemic issues will be addressed. What I wonder is about people who decline services, who are maybe they've found a place where they are comfortable, but it's just not a place that maybe it has an impact on a disproportionate impact on everybody else around there, or maybe a city service that's nearby. Maybe they grew up in that neighborhood and they have family and friends in that neighborhood, but so they refuse services. What is the solution in that circumstance? Thank you.
Great. Who do we think wants to take that one?
I'm sure all three of us have something to say, but I think we should defer to Lara first.
There you go. And before Lara speaks, I want to acknowledge, first of all, Tom, for the question, and also the fact that that's why we're here, to talk about what the policy is, could, and should be. And that's where we do want to hear from you and other residents as well, what is appropriate. And that gets to the point of making sure that we're hearing from our unhoused residents as well, and not just those who are housed. So Lara, go ahead, take it away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's you could ask that question in relationship to an encampment policy and saying, well, what if people don't choose to go to whatever location the city says they can be in? And you can also ask that question in terms of what if people are not interested in shelter or transitional housing or whatever services we have available. And I think, to me, the important thing that I just really want to hold on to is that nobody is choosing to remain homeless because they are so thrilled with remaining homeless. And generally speaking, I would say if people are not choosing to take advantage of a particular service or a particular opportunity, it's not the right opportunity for them. In the same way that we all make choices in our lives and take advantage of some opportunities and not others. So there's not really an easy answer to that, to say that a person who is choosing not to move to another location or not to move inside or not to do something, if we say it's not the right fit for them, then it's really incumbent upon us to figure out what is the right fit. And to the council member's point, to really listen to people experiencing homelessness, to learn what is the right fit, and to have a wider variety of options to offer people. We don't have a lot of variety to offer people right now, and for some people what we have is not the right fit, and they may choose to decline it. But I think it's important to think about it in the context of any of us choosing to engage or not engage in any options that we have in our lives.
Next, Peter.
No, this is why this policy is such a difficult issue. You've raised, Tom, the sort of the essence of what we're trying to figure out. In this instance, it is very true what Lara said, and having done outreach myself, I can kind of affirm that it often takes, several attempts to engage someone, to earn their trust through outreach and through service provision. And so we need to continue to provide that. But we also need to think about, if, to your point, Tom, they are having a disproportionate impact, what kind of mechanisms do we have in place to make sure that while that person builds the trust with outreach, that we also respect the fact that we have other community members that are negatively impacted by that. And so, that is where kind of that other side of that coin comes in. And I think there's a variety of things that we can look at that are not, draconian police-based, serving people with citations in jail. We might be able to offer, shelter stays in exchange for being subject to removal, things of that nature. The city of Seattle has done, they've created a policy where they have kind of different zones in the city. They have 40 allowable encampment zones. And then they have what they're calling emphasis areas, which are areas where it's kind of the highest impact, where folks don't need to be provided with a notice. If they're found to be camping there, the city can go in and can sort of remove them, assist them to a different location without having to provide services. And then once they're in that different location, continue to provide outreach and try to work with them to build that trust. So I think there's a balance there. And Seattle's kind of pioneering what that might look like. And if Oakland is ready to strike that balance, I think it could work here. Remembering that we never need to forget about that person and their humanity, and to Lara's point, continue to try different options. But we have other constituents that whose needs need to be addressed by the government. And so I think there's a balance there. Dario, do you have any additional thoughts?
No, I mean, generally, I agree with both of you all's comments. I'm a firm believer that it starts with trust, and you've got to. It's not going to happen with one visit. It probably won't happen with 5, but it starts with whoever that outreach provider is, being able to build a certain level of trust with that person that they're engaging, because ultimately you're there to help. And if that person doesn't believe that you're genuinely there to help, you're always going to get a no or a decline in services. I think it's also important that the people that are showing up look like the people that they're helping. I think that goes a long way to building trust, right? To make sure they speak the same language. And I'm not talking about just formal languages. I'm talking about you can connect with that person on a level that person understands that you are genuine, that you are truly there to help, and that the alternative that you're presenting truly will improve their situation rather than hurt it. And so for me, it all starts with building that trust, building that rapport.
And Mr. Chair, can I ask a question from the panelists?
Of course.
Can either of you speak to the Comfort Inn Suite, which is in my district on Eads Avenue, and the Renaissance Hotel, which is on Eads as well, in terms of whether or not they are at capacity? And then also if you could speak to the trailer encampment on Hagenberger and where we are in terms of whether or not they're at capacity or near capacity. And then I don't know if either of the three of you could also speak to the tiny homes that are proposed right next to the trailer encampment on Hagenberger, when that project may get underway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good thing.
Yeah, so I'll speak to the hotels, and Lara, I think, can speak to Operation Home Base and the YSA tiny home project. So for the hotels, they are, it's what the state calls Project Room Key, and it is a state program in collaboration with Alameda County. And so the city of Oakland, we are not providing staffing, we are not providing resources to those hotels. Our outreach teams are making referrals, but other than that, we are not involved with the Project Room Key hotels. The Radisson, which is what they're calling Operation Safer Ground, is at capacity, and Operation Safer Ground is specifically for unsheltered folks who may be at a higher risk of contracting the virus due to their age or previous medical history, but they are not COVID positive. And then the other two hotels, the Comfort Inn and the Quality Inn, are what the county is calling Operation Comfort. And those two hotels are specifically for unsheltered individuals that test positive for COVID or have been exposed to a person who have tested positive. And so the Comfort Inn is at about 50% capacity. And we've seen a decline in those numbers over the last week, I would say. It is slowly trickling down. And for the Quality Inn, they are at about 10% capacity. Last time I checked, they only had eight participants at that hotel. And so that one also has been steadily declining as well over the past couple of weeks. But I'll turn it over to Lara for specifics about Operation Home Base, which is the FEMA trailer program, and then the tiny house program with YSA.
Before you move on, Dario, maybe you can give it. Is there a reason why they are at lower capacity as a percentage?
Yes. So when a person, after they have recovered from their illness and they are no longer COVID positive, they are no longer eligible to stay at that hotel. And so they are either discharged to the Radisson. If there are vacancies, they're discharged back to the shelter which they came, or on some occasions, unfortunately, we're trying to get some clarity from the county. They're being discharged, and we're unclear about what services they're receiving if they're not going back to shelter or to some type of shared or transitional housing program.
Yeah, well, we need to raise the issue. We need to raise the issue because of the low percentage makes no sense given the level of homelessness in the city of Oakland. Yeah, and so it's kind of mind-boggling to me that we have those beds that are there. They're not being occupied. And so we need to be raising that issue with the county.
You're absolutely right, Vice Mayor. I will say that, and this is no consolation, but 3 weeks ago, all 3 of those hotels were at or near capacity. And so what we found is that the Radisson has remained at that level, but the Comfort Inn and the Quality Inn, as they are discharging people as they recover, they are not filling or admitting people that have tested positive at the same rate at which they're discharging people.
So that's a positive relative to COVID contractions, but not necessarily from using our maximum resources for addressing this broader problem that we face.
Correct. Lara, did you want to add about Operation Home Base?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I was just going to add about the hotels also that the Comfort Inn was for people who are positive or exposed or symptomatic. So the number of positive people, even when those hotels were almost at capacity, the number of actual positive people who were homeless was actually quite low. We haven't seen huge numbers of people who are homeless who have tested positive, which is really great. And so to Dario's point, as people either got through a 2 week, if they were exposed and they got through their 2 week isolation and did not develop symptoms or become positive, they left the hotel. If they were positive when they got better, they left the hotel. Or if they had symptoms, they got tested and again waited the 2 weeks and then left the hotel. So to your point, Councilmember, it is somewhat good in terms of the epidemic, but not a good use of resources.
No, because once they are released, they go back into the same environment potentially to contract COVID-19 again. I just don't understand the logic, but go ahead, Lara.
So some of the folks that are leaving the hotels and actually going to the home-based trailers if they're still at risk. And so the home-based trailers are on Hegenberger, as you said. As I mentioned before, it's 67 FEMA trailers that we got from the state. So technically the capacity to house 134 people, although most trailers are double occupancy. Some of them will be single occupancy, some of the smaller ones. And those are really designed for people who are at a high risk of COVID. So the same population that's going to the county safer ground hotels, people who are over 65 and or people who have underlying medical conditions that puts them at serious risk of complication or death if they were to contract COVID. So the idea behind the trailer intervention is to really keep people in place, which as I was talking about with encampment interventions, it's staffed 24/7. We have food brought in for all 3 meals. There's medical care that's coming on site. There's mental health care that's coming on site. All of the trailers are fully hooked up with electricity and running water and flushing toilets and hot showers. And the idea really is to have people, at least for now, really stay put and not risk being exposed.
Does that 67 include the original 9 that was supposed to go on that site?
It does. It does. Our trailer math has been tricky, but it does include the original 9. And at some point, when we're not in such a health crisis, those 9 trailers will get used for their original purpose, which was to provide housing for homeless families who are going to be in a workforce program. So that will still happen. We're just delayed, and we decided to use them for COVID response during this emergency. The tiny homes that you asked about will be also co-located on the same site, but separated in a different part of the site. That program is going to be operated by Youth Spirit Artworks, and they are a homeless youth program based in Berkeley. They'll be serving youth from throughout northern Alameda County, and they have a tiny home program where they've had volunteers build tiny homes that will get put on the site. They'll have bathrooms and a kitchen, and that will be a transitional housing program for homeless youth. And that should open in the next couple of months.
And in the next couple of months?
The site work is happening right now, and I know they're hoping to open by the end of July, which might be optimistic, but that might happen.
And how many of those?
22 young people at one time will be served.
All right. Thanks, Lara. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, I think Lara, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last occupancy count at Operation Home Base, I believe they were up to 107.
Yeah, it's higher now. It's probably, I didn't look today, but they are almost full. Yeah, they're down to filling. All of the outreach teams are being very strategic about who gets referred in. They're down to filling their last group of beds.
Thank you. That's great.
Good news. Thanks for the question, Vice Mayor. I know that a number of my residents and your residents who live in the area surrounding Hagenberger and these sites that we were talking about are curious about what's happening, how they're being used. And so thank you for lifting that up. I know we spent a little extra time on that. So right now we're at 7:50. We're already past the hour. I'm going to take the opportunity to close out and wrap things up by thanking all of the participants. I think we had at one point, it was almost 70 participants on Zoom, and I haven't even gotten the tally for those who are on the other social media platforms. But appreciate you guys taking your time being invested into understanding what is happening here in Oakland relative to homelessness, advocating for those solutions that make sense, that live up to our values, and that will really set us up on a path so that all Oaklanders are able to thrive. I want to lift up the team of our panelists, Dario, Dunston, Lara Tannenbaum, and Peter Radu. You guys are clearly extremely knowledgeable, sleeves rolled up deep. I know that you guys put in beyond overtime into really helping make sure that the city is getting this right. And even though it might not look as though we are doing much on the outside, from the outside, I know that we would be struggling even more than we are now, if not for the incredible effort that you guys are putting in to help lead us. As a Vice Mayor Reed, thanks for your partnership in this. As a reminder, it was an information gathering, primarily an information gathering town hall, so that we can take this and bring it into our July 6th Life Enrichment Committee meeting, where we will be discussing the homeless encampment management policy, the options, and how we move forward there in support of our unhoused residents in what Peter described as a renewed social contract with them to support them. Lastly, if you guys have other thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, feel free to reach out to my office, District 6, and then the numeral 6 at oaklandca.gov with any questions that weren't answered here. And also, if you want to make sure that your voice is heard by the entire council on these types of issues, you can email council, spelled COUNCIL, at oaklandca.gov. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you to those who participated, and looking forward to the next conversation where we move Oakland forward.